All right, let's briefly take a look at the shape of the periodic table, right? So you can tell it's not a perfect rectangle, and obviously there's a reason for that. And so what we say that things that are in the same column, what we call groups in chemistry, share similar properties. So for example, everything in this first column or this first group is very similar to one another. Everything in the second group is similar to one another. Everything in the last group here is similar to one another. Everything in the second to last group is similar to one another. When we say similar, we mean in terms of chemical reactivity. So for example, almost everything in this first group is very reactive with water. Whereas everything in this last group, what we call the noble gases, are very unreactive. However, that's not true for the whole periodic table. So these first two columns and then these last 7 columns are what we call the main group elements. And so this is true for them, right? Everything in the same column is pretty similar, so they're predictable. And then in between, what we have here are the transition metals. And we can include these last 2 rows in with the transition metals. These are not very predictable. They just do what they want to do. So we'll just write do what they want. But overall, the main group elements are very predictable. And you can even tell that in the numbering scheme. You see how this one calls this 1A and then 2A, and then it skips the transition metals to go to 3A and then 4A. So there's 2 different ways to number the columns. One way is to only count the main group elements, that's with the A's, and then the other is to just go 1, 2, 3, but in this case, include the transition metals. I'm not a big proponent of the group numbers, as long as you know that things in the same column will behave very similar to one another. Cool. And then the last thing we want to know about the periodic table, some periodic tables show this, some don't. So for example, this one up here doesn't show this, whereas others will. And that's this black line right here that we call the staircase. So everything in red here gets classified as a metal, and in general, metals conduct electricity. So think about like wires, right? Wires are generally made out of copper, which is a metal. Everything in blue is generally going to be a non-metal, and they don't conduct electricity. And then, of course, when we have categories, we always have stuff in between. So we call these metalloids, and they're somewhere in between. So overall, using a periodic table, be able to identify a element as a metal, non-metal, or a metalloid. And in general, I'd recommend that you basically kind of carve into your head the basic shape of a periodic table. That's kind of what it looks like. I'm not the best artist, but we have hydrogen here, helium, lithium, beryllium, and then boron, carbon, and so on and so forth. Know the overall shape of the periodic table. And that's pretty much it.